And yes, it's now time for our annual Bear Pit session with Canada's news leaders. And we have a lot of questions, so let's get to it. Joining me now, Brodie Fenelon, Editor-in-Chief and Executive Director of Daily News at CBC, Wendy Freeman, President of CTV News, Dave Budge, Vice President of News and Information at Rogers Sports and Media, and Ward Smith, Senior Vice President at Global News. I'm going to start the session soon, but if you have questions for our guests, you're going to notice something to the right of me, of this video that you're seeing right now. It's something called Meeting Pulse. Now, you're going to see the agenda there, and if you scroll down right to the bottom, you'll find a tab for Q&A. So make sure you sign in there. You can type out your questions, and you can also see what others are asking, and you could upvote your favorite. So I'll let you do that when you have a question, and we'll see. We might incorporate them into our discussion, or we might save the Q&A depending on what we have here. So let's get started. We were all here, the five of us, 1 year ago, and most of us were working virtually. At the time, vaccines were far off on the horizon. We had just covered the tragic death of George Floyd, and we also witnessed all the calls for change that came with it, externally and internally in our own newsrooms. So I want to go around with all of you, and Wendy, I'll start with you, and then maybe we'll go clockwise. What has been the biggest change this past year in your newsroom?
Thanks, Farah. Good morning, everyone. So we've done a lot of initiatives across our newsrooms since we all spoke last June. Our company promised a target for BIPOC representation in our senior management team of at least 25% by 2025. CTV News itself increased hiring of BIPOC individuals on air and behind the scenes since last June, and that included positions in senior management as well. One of the things that we did, which was a big change for our newsrooms, was we appointed an internal CTV News ombudsperson. And that was somewhere where staff can go if they had any editorial content concerns related to stories. We wanted to create a safe place for journalists to voice their concerns about editorial related bias or discrimination. Another thing that we did was we also started monthly community editorial boards where we would all get on Zoom calls and we would have discussions. Some of the discussions we had were about anti-Black racism and in news coverage and how to combat it. We've spoken with members of the Indigenous community. We've done editorial boards on anti-Asian racism. And one of the other things we also did was we also looked at our coverage and where we were lacking. And for over 27 years at our station, CTV News in Saskatchewan, they had run a program called Indigenous Circle. And we brought that to the CTV National News for a weekly segment. And that now runs once a week. So we've done a lot. We also did some specials on racism and discrimination through our alliance with BIPOC TV and Film. We also helped drive a new Higher BIPOC web portal. And again, we've done all these things, but again, we have a lot more to do. Okay,
Brodie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. I'll start by just saying congrats to Wendy on your Lifetime Achievement Award, Wendy. Just awesome. Congratulations. Look, we've done a number of things, and I could list a bunch of work, but I think I'll just, if I can talk about one thing that has changed in the year, it's that our journalism is better. It's just better. It's deeper. It's richer. There's more nuance. There's more voices, more perspectives. And that's the fruit of a lot of stuff, of everything from a real focus on trying to change the culture around building inclusive newsrooms, training, and welcoming more voices. I just Tuesday night, the National, our flagship show, led for the kind of third night in the row on this awful story out of Kamloops. But the first 10 minutes of that first block was built on some really rich reporting around residential schools, around what's happening in Manitoba, the role of the Pope, a bunch of important voices from various Indigenous First Nations. And then, we had a piece on Black representation on corporate boards, and we had a piece on pride and the Catholic school system. And we had our reporter, Susan Ormiston, on Tulsa and the anniversary there. I mean, this is one night, 1 hour, but it's the kind of storytelling you're seeing where we just look, sound, read more like the country we're serving in. And so I think I would say that's the biggest change.
Dave.
I would echo kind of both of those things. At Rogers, we've made a number of changes, created a new management position around inclusive news coverage, training, various different steps, all just steps to make ourselves better. And I agree with Brody. I think the journalism is better, particularly on issues that everyone sees require more care, right? There's more care going into the coverage on these important stories. The other thing I think fundamentally that's changed is the level of the conversation, is the candor and the willingness to listen, and the openness of sharing the personal impact of these events, everything from George Floyd, to the Kamloops story. It's creating a safe space for people from marginalized communities to be able to express themselves and then to act on it. And I don't think we're, like Wendy said, we're nowhere near finished. It'll never be finished, but I think we're better. And I think that's kind of a fundamental thing. Ward?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't hear the throw. Good morning, everyone. The big change for us, I would say, and it's not just limited to global news, is I feel the level of responsibility, the respect and the accountability to our people, our audience, and each other has never been deeper. Keeping people safe, healthy physically and mentally. The nature of our work has dramatically changed, obviously, with COVID. Just the fact we're working from home or in different environments. The respect in the workplace as it relates to harassment, racism. All of these ideas and feelings really point to that people are quite fragile, in my mind. More so than ever. The world is polarized. It's the information is immediate. The isolation is real, and the issues are complex. So, the human factor that we take into account when we're telling stories and when we're living in this world today, that's what's palpably different for me. What we've learned, what we've talked about, but it continues to be coming at us. And I don't think that the level of the commitment has done anything except improve. And I'm always a big believer in recognizing the change that has taken place as much as what still needs to take place. Farah.
Okay, well, it's really great to hear you say that accountability has never been deeper, and to hear all of you say that there still is room for growth, and all of your organizations over the past year have made hiring, BIPOC individuals a priority, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes. But the thing is, when you bring in new voices, right, they will challenge what you view as normal. So what are you doing to create an atmosphere where people feel that they can challenge the status quo? And I'll let any of you take this, whoever wants to go first.
Well, one of the things that I mentioned is that we put an internal ombudsperson in place, so that if someone comes in and they feel that they can't speak to their manager, they have a safe place to go to. And that person then reports to me, and we can work on those issues. And again, our editorial meetings that we have now monthly. But I think because of COVID, though, these conversations have been harder to have. Like we were talking before, we have very few people in our newsrooms, and those spur of the moment conversations that you need in newsrooms, those diversity of voices that you need, they aren't happening as much. So that's been an issue because of COVID. So, you know, I hope when this is over, we can get that back in the newsrooms, those robust conversations that are so needed. But for us, having this internal ombudsperson has been something that we set up.
Brody, do you want to weigh in on this? Brody?
He looks frozen.
I think he's frozen.
Oh, he's frozen. Peter, if you want to weigh in on this kind of challenging the status quo, because we've noticed people have been challenging it on social media. There's been a real trend of journalists going on social media to air their concerns. Ward.
Well, I feel that, it's a great question, and it's something that we're all, and for the greater part of a year, been asking that. I think that, everybody's going to be looking for something different. My experience is, sadly, has not been the experience that so many people have faced, and that's something that I recognize. And there's a responsibility for the organizations that we operate to have representation of and reflection of people that are coming into our newsroom. Different generational changes also. Recognizing that how people speak, what they need, how they can express themselves freely. And I think there's a difference between what we publish and what we broadcast versus how people feel. That's always been the case. A lot of the conflicts that we've seen emerging are, even just look at the Middle East and how you discuss that as an organization. That's been present. It's sort of the immediacy, and at times, you mentioned social media, the influence of that on our people. And Farah, you and I have had conversations about people want to be on the right side of the story, and that is something that's fundamentally important to people. The question is, and it becomes one of, is that a personal expression of your opinion? Is that providing the platforms that we have to provide others with that opportunity to express themselves? And so I think that, there is always going to be, and a need to be, that opportunity for people to discuss what's wrong with our policies. Why is it that they feel this certain way? And frankly, the idea of a boss standing there telling somebody they're wrong, we know what that looks like, and we've felt it, and we've seen it before. And so for me, everybody's going to need something a little bit different. And that's the big listening part of understanding who our teams are, what the makeup is, what they need, because it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, no, it certainly isn't. And I want to get to the actual Middle East part of this conversation, but I want to wait for Brody to get back on. But, the other thing that we should really discuss is the idea of objectivity, right? And journalism, it's evolved over years. It's evolved, during the civil rights era in the 60s, it evolved. When we talk about we talk about residential schools. I mean, would journalists back then, if there was social media and they were airing, concerns about what was happening then, would that be seen as objective? So, Dave, I'll throw that over to you. I mean, how do you kind of square the notion of objectivity and the time that we're in now?
Yeah, I don't think it's changed much. I think that we're human, right? So objectivity is impossible, right? Like pure objectivity. We're not, objectivity robots in journalism. Mm-hmm. And there's always been activism, right? There's always been people who get into journalism with the hope of affecting change. You talked about the civil rights movement. People got into journalism to try to end the war in Vietnam. After Watergate, they got into journalism to challenge corruption. The best journalism that came out of that was, and the most effective work that came out of that was when people who had that desire to achieve some positive change used journalism the best way that it can be used. They went out and did reporting. They shone a light on things that the public didn't know about. They did it with evidence and accuracy and balance. They produced stories, and this has, I think, always been the case, where even those who are being criticized have to recognize and acknowledge that the story is solid, that the information is good. That's the most powerful way to affect change through journalism. And I think that when we in media have the appetite to do that and are not afraid to tell stories and to take on tough subjects, and give employees the opportunity to pitch stories that might be uncomfortable, that might not have been told before, that's great. Then we have less of a disconnect between people's opinions and the work that goes on here. But it still has to be done through that lens of objectivity and accuracy and balance, right? You want your coverage to be respected in all corners, right? And if it's, if the coverage is coming from, Fox News or CNN, where they've squared off with diametrically opposed political opinions, all of the impact of all of the journalism is reduced by that. The credibility of all of the work is affected by the level of opinion that's out there in the editorial content. So I guess my point is, my long-winded way is, there's opportunity for people that are passionate about subjects that should be covered to have a real effect, but doing it with really solid journalism.
And I'll ask you, Wendy. Then we have Brody back. Hey, Brody, on his cell phone.
Total
Technology.
failure here on my internet. And isn't this our life?
Brody, we were just talking about the murky word activism, accountability, and objectivity in this world that we live in now, right? And how you balance objectivity with kind of lived experience of journalists that you have working for you. So let me ask you this. There was a letter that was recently signed by 2,200 people. A quarter of them are journalists. In this letter, it asks for more nuanced coverage of the Israeli-Palestinian issue, the conflict. What kind of conversations did you have with your employees coming out of this letter asking for that more nuanced coverage?
Sure, and thanks for the question. Forgive me if I cut out or I'm a little crackly, because this isn't the best, and sorry for my service cutting out. Listen, the letter itself called for more nuanced and journalism, more perspectives, and we are 100% in agreement. But it went further than that. And it went into places of advocating for a position around our journalism. And not to parse it, I mean, basically, we are always concerned about the public. Ultimately, what do the public think about a letter like that? And does it raise questions in their minds about how fair and balanced and accurate we're going to be in our coverage? And if those questions start to surface, which they did, then we got to manage that. So the conversation with our staff was really open-hearted and open-minded. Tell us why you signed. What were you thinking? Why can you not share your views or opinions inside? How do we help facilitate that? Let's have this conversation inside. It's incredibly important. We want your voice. We want your perspectives. We want better journalism. Talk to us inside. And so that was the nature of the conversation. And we're having those conversations all the time.
Wendy, our job is to activism, again, that word, it's a little bit, it's charged. But our job as journalists is to constantly examine, to re-examine how stories are being told externally, internally, how we do all that. So how do we make sure we're turning over every stone, we're exposing nuance, instead of just falling trap to shutting things down because it's a quicker, easier way to do things. Maybe there's lobby groups that are maybe not even lobbying, maybe bullying, getting into our inboxes. How do we do that to make sure that we're not doing things the way that we have always done them, but also not being activists?
We need to always have these conversations, and we have to make sure that people feel like they can have these conversations in the newsroom. They shouldn't be afraid to have these conversations, and we need to always have them. And as far as the lobbying groups, we don't kowtow to anyone, whether it's lobby groups or whether it's politicians. No one is ever going to tell us what to do. And, but again, it's about having the conversations in the newsroom and making sure that all voices are heard. And that is the most important thing. And that people feel free to have those discussions. But like I said, because of COVID, it's been a lot harder. You don't have everyone in the newsroom and those robust conversations always happening. And that's why it's so important, especially now, to keep communicating with everyone, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's like this. But as you could see, things happen, people, the internet stops, all of that. But again, conversations have to keep happening.
Dave, you spoke about the US and how things are going. If we've watched coverage, if you flip between channels, it's like you're living in two different worlds sometimes. We saw in Daryl Bricker's presentation that Canadians want more fact-based journalism, right? They want just the facts. But what does just the facts mean? Actually, Ward, I'm going to start with you on this. What does that mean, just the facts? And how do we have accountability in this digital age, in a virtual world?
Wow, that's a tough question. Look, I think that, when it was said that there are alternative facts, I think really the underlying statement was, what facts can we use to build our story arc? What facts can we use that will leave an impression? What will politicize the facts? And so these are exactly the sorts of things that our teams need to unbundle. They have to verify the facts. They have to have confirmation that this is real. And I feel that if there are differences of opinion, this is critically important for the balance. Not everybody's going to see the issue the same way. So the facts that people will point to statistics or numbers that they think will support their opinion. And that, frankly, is sort of the best way to get at some of this. The documentation that's available in today's world, you have to be very suspicious of what it is. And I think that, when we're looking at stories as they unfold, as they become complex, we really have to take into consideration a number of stakeholders and turn to the experience of people, whether it's a lived experience or experience on the ground in a certain region or coverage of a story. So for me, finding the facts, that is our job. Ensuring that the facts are, that there's an opportunity for strong and articulated voices on different sides all around continues to be the best. And if you think about broadcast in just the definition, we're trying to reach the largest audience. We're not trying to be niche. We're not trying to just placate or satisfy a certain group that's living in their belief system. And so for me, broadcast really is, and journalism is, this opportunity to provide a forum and a platform for discussion and discourse. And if we can't do that on our own terms as we look at these stories, because they are complex and they do hit in the heart of people's and the minds of people. So that is what our mission generally is. And if it changes and evolves, it's based on information that we can verify. I know that when Dave was talking about CNN and Fox, those are lessons that we're seeing, and we're, trust me, I don't think that we're immune to that risk here in Canada, as this becomes more, as people find the message that they want to read and believe. And so we have to be very vigilant in how we approach this, because trust is eroded when you stray away from the facts.
Yeah, and how do you win back that trust? And I know you say that there's probably not an appetite here like there is in the United States, but we are seeing large divisions here. I mean, COVID was a prime example of that. So is that a concern to you, Brodie, that we are heading more into an opinion space in journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I was struck by the Ipsos result there about people saying they want facts and just tell me the facts. And we hear that all the time. I get letters all the time saying, I don't want your point of view. I don't want your journalist to tell me what to think. I want the facts. I want you to surface context and what other people think, not what you think, what other people think about these issues, and then I'm going to make up my own mind. And then I'm suspicious a bit about those figures too, because we see huge audiences in the last 4 years in Canada gravitate to positional journalism, positional news in the form of CNN or Fox or MSNBC. I mean, those audiences are massive, and they're coming down now that Trump's out of office. But if you look at that, if you look at consumption of social media and how popular Facebook still is, built on an algorithm that serves you and reinforces your own perspectives and your own viewpoint. So there's no doubt we as people gravitate to this stuff because we can see it. And I do think it's important, and I completely agree with Ward, that we've got to be careful with this. We've seen exactly what happens when news media become polarized themselves in an effort to attract and retain a certain audience. Then you have the Capitol. Then you have suspicion around basic science, and you don't have a common understanding of facts, from mask wearing to vaccination rates. You can see it playing out in so many different aspects of culture in the United States. And yeah, you're right, Far, that it's surfacing, elements of it are surfacing here. So back to the point of providing as many perspectives as possible, but sticking to factual, fact-based journalism is hugely important for all of us.
I want to bring that back, Wendy, to social media, because back in the day, 20 years ago even, you didn't see on social media, a journalist who's a parent advocate for school reopening in Ontario, for example. You didn't see where people stood, and now you do in a way that you didn't before. So talk to me about your view on that, on kind of the activism side, because at the end of the day, the output, what we see on television, on broadcast, on web is different from what we see on social media. And those journalists are under a microscope.
Well, I think what's really important is if a journalist tweets or puts on social media about a lived experience, that's very different than tweeting about, taking a side or giving an opinion, unless, of course, they're an opinionated journalist, that has a column. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very different, and we have to look at that. But again, we have to be very careful here, because so many people, if we don't report the facts, people want to hear, what they hear from their friends and what they believe in, these echo chambers. Mm-hmm. And if we don't report the facts and we're just reporting echo chambers of what people want to hear, eventually this will hurt democracy, as we saw what happened in the United States. And it will chip away and chip away. And that is very dangerous for Canada.
Let me follow up, because one of the divisions we saw was during the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and with budget restraints in all of our newsrooms, with bureaus closing. Do you think that we can give a fair and factual assessment of what's happening on the ground in the Middle East, for example, through like a melt where we take coverage from different stations in the States or around the world, and a sign off from Toronto, Wendy?
Well, we had our correspondent, Paul Workman, was on the ground in Israel and in Gaza, and because that is very important for us to have boots on the ground, and that the reporters are embedded in these communities reporting the facts and the truth, which is what Paul Workman did.
Okay, and I know, Brody, you had Margaret Evans there as well, covering the story. Let's move on to the future of news. I'm surprised. I'm actually shocked we don't have any questions from the audience, but I have enough to fill us up for the hour. So I don't know if they're not coming in or I'm not seeing them, but just a reminder, you can see that to the right of your screen. And if you just scroll down right to the bottom after the agenda, there's a Q&A button that you can press, and then you can ask your question. So I guess the question I have is, we don't have a centralized newsroom anymore. Everybody's working from home, and I know a lot of businesses are rethinking the way that they work. So I'll leave this open to any of you, and maybe all of you. How do you see the future of news and how we work?
Well, I'll jump in there. I mean, from early days of the pandemic, I was asked, and I'm sure others have been on this call as well, to sort of look at the health of our teams. How do we move people out of the building? We did it practically overnight. And we had two, some people might remember this, we had two cases early days, like case number 54 in Canada was within our newsroom. This galvanized our efforts to understand very deeply the concern, the fear that people had. And so we knew that we had crews that were very mobile. We knew that we could transmit content, but different parts of our business were really hard to replicate outside of the stations. Those essential jobs, some of the operations and control room functions. But I think what we're going to learn, and the silver lining in all of this, is that we can communicate differently. That despite the cultural impacts of not being in the newsroom, as we've seen, there is an opportunity for us to have more flexible arrangements with our teams, to understand that life does intersect with work at times, and more so than ever. So what we're discovering and seeing is the ways that teams are communicating despite not being in front of each other. And there are, commute times that are savings. There's housing considerations, education, and parents. We have people that want to come back in the building, others that don't want to come back in the building. And there's this general sense that we're learning the entire time. And the communication piece on how people are feeling, the empathy and the need to provide when there's uncertainty around a question in the household about, listen, my son at school was in a classroom where there's a positive case. All of these questions we have gone over and back. But I think what fundamentally has pulled us together is what's also taken us apart. And these are sort of the concerns around the well-being of our people. So far, I hope, out of everything that we've been through as an organization, and through this pandemic, that we can see this incredible strength of some people that have continued to come to work and do their jobs with like so much more passion, and the responsibility they have in covering the news at a time when they're even part of it, or they're disengaged from a culture that will support them. That's the strength of what I'm seeing with our teams and our people and our audiences watching and consuming our news or reading about it. So there is some incredibly good that will come from this. And I hope that we can get back to a new normal that will have flexibility and that compassion and understanding and how best to tell our stories.
Dave, do you see a hybrid model for City News in the future?
Yeah, for sure. And 6 or 9 months ago, I would have probably said, I don't want everybody ever to come back to the newsroom, right? Because there's so much, there's efficiencies. There's so much less time wasted on travel from one place to another to bang off a clip, just get it on Zoom. The pool arrangements that are sparing all of our newsrooms with limited resources from having, 10 cameras at a premier's news conference rather than doing a pool and freeing up that resource to go do other things. There's lots of upside. But now, the impact on people, on communication between members of the teams, on people's mental health and their morale. We need to get people back into the room. I hope in, like you say, a balance where we're not just sinking back to the same old that the way we did things in 2019, where we've learned from and taken the best out of this situation, but where we, like Ward is talking about, where we take better care of people, have the benefits of people collaborating and looking each other in the face and having that social aspect to the job.
I have 2 questions that have come in, unless Wendy or Brody, you'd like to weigh in on this.
Well, I was just going to say there's lots of good that came out of this, and one just small example, but I think it's really fascinating, is that the physicality of a meeting room has changed with video conferencing, and there's an equalizing effect there. I think it's really better for this question of more voices at the table. The power dynamics are changed, so that's really positive. But I also see lots of problems with the way we're working. I find others have mentioned mental health and stress, but just all the natural pressure release valves that are built into working side by side with people, where you can turn and commiserate and vent, gone. and so people are living in their own world, and so everything is heightened emotionally. Everything is charged. When there is friction, it is more intense than ever. And I worry a lot about cohesion as an organization, as a group, as a news service. So I think that's the one, probably the biggest problem out of working this way for the past year and a half. And so if there's a hybrid, it's going to be, it for sure includes people coming back. That is for sure.
Yeah, I still believe too that journalists thrive on physical interaction and robust discussions. And that, is not happening, as I keep saying, as much as it could in a newsroom. But if there is also one other good thing that has come out of this, is that a lot of journalists sometimes felt tied to the newsroom, and now they really can file their stories from anywhere. So I do see that, especially in local news, you could really have local journalists embedded in their communities. And they don't have to run back to the newsroom now to file anymore. They can really embed themselves more in the communities and maybe tell better stories as a result.
Yeah, it's funny, the days where we thought, Zoom interviews were just so bad quality, we could never put them on air,
Right.
And that's all we do. Okay, we have a lot of questions coming in fast and furious, so I want to get to them. Wendy, you kind of mentioned this. So Brody, I'm going to turn this to you. It's great that all of your companies have targets for BIPOC journalists, but what's being done to grow BIPOC media managers? In 2021, it's concerning to see this panel is all white and mostly male.
Well, at CBC, 60% of every hire and promotion in the past year and a bit came from one of 3 equity-seeking groups, and that's at all levels. That's at management, that's at frontline, that is middle management, it's everybody. So we are working very hard at that. The senior management of news, current affairs, and local at CBC is representative. Could be better, yeah, and we're gonna make it better, but we are getting there. And until we get there, then we have to work really hard at making sure that the voices we do have within our service are heard, and there's space for them. But it's number one priority.
Yeah, Farah, I would just jump in there also, because it is pointed out every year, the makeup of this group. There aren't many of us. But I can tell you that I've been in this role just over 2 years, about 2 years. The senior leadership of news was all men, all white men, 3 years ago. And that was based on the experience that they were given, the privilege that they had, the opportunities that were afforded them and me. And I think that immediately we've continued to evolve our structure. Currently, there are 6 women on my senior leadership team and 3 men, and myself being one of them. We have 2 women from racialized communities who are on the senior leadership team. I think the biggest obstacle that remains, and we've all heard about the systemic racism within all of our organizations, and not just media, but I think that it's the bridge to getting people into roles where they will succeed, where they can succeed, building bridges at an early stage and ensuring that the reflection and the representation is there. And I've talked to many of our Black journalists, for example, who are incredibly strong producers and are incredibly strong journalists. And their hopes and what they've expressed to me is they don't want to fail. The pressure and the sense that they have to be welcomed and to be supported, and that is the work that I'm pledging to them, that we will provide them the path and frankly the trajectory of the hires that I've been seeing well before this came to light in such a magnified way, was that most of our hires, if you look purely at the underrepresented communities within our newsrooms, has exponentially grown over the last 4 years. And Brody mentioned a target of 60%. I mean, targets and all of that doesn't matter unless they're effective and successful, and we support these people. So our hope is that in time, short time, you will not only see in leadership roles right across the country at our stations, and where we're frankly putting amazing people who have that reflection and that representation in place, that they will be sitting in this Bear Pit conference sooner than later.
Yeah, and again, challenging how we've always done things, which I know is difficult for people who've been in the business. But right now, there's a generation gap, there's a lived experience gap, and some would say our newsrooms are divided. So that's obviously more important than ever, and change comes from the top. With that, I want to go to this next question, and it's again on opinion activism, the kind of theme we talked about, but it's a specific question that I think is important. In terms of possibly having personal opinions in reports, what should reporters be asking themselves when it comes to what they could or should not say that may be seen as a personal opinion? I'll leave this one open as well. So, Brody, or is that a sigh or a?
Oh, well, no, not a sigh. No, it is the question. I mean, listen, a year ago this week, I sent out a note to our staff saying, we're hearing, some of you are saying that our journalistic standards and practices, we call it our JSP, you feel this is getting in the way of expressing something about your lived experience or your view of the world. So we're going to take that on. So next week at CBC is a really important week for us. More than 60 staff were involved in looking at how we interpret our standards through an inclusive lens. They're about to present to every single senior leader in news, current affairs, and local a set of recommendations, and it looked at everything from opinion and impartiality and social media and how we report on the police to point of view. And so this is one of these questions is exactly that. What we learned is we have principles, but people want the details. What does it mean? Where is the line? When do you cross? And so I'm hoping that we're going to come out of this process, which started and has been months of work and really incredible work by staff to provide clarity. What do we actually mean? And where is it problematic? I mean, ultimately for me, it becomes problematic, as I said in another answer, when the public you're serving start to say, wait a second. Now I'm worried. Now I don't know if I can trust your reporting because I feel like there's an agenda at play here, or that you're coming from only one point of view. And the minute that happens, you have an issue as a news organization. So that's the line right now, but we do need to provide clarity and hopefully some examples.
Go ahead. Sorry, Wendy.
I was just going to say that journalism is always evolving, and all of us have policy and guidelines that we have to follow. But, I think it's really important to always be looking at the policies and guidelines because, yes, there is a generational change. And kudos to the CBC for doing that. And it's something that we should be looking at as well. And I think that's a great idea. And, we always have to look at our policies and guidelines because they will change over time. And, journalism evolves and we all need to evolve as well.
Yes. And for me, there are different things, and it is confusing. When I remember in 2008, when Twitter was really starting to make, its way into newsrooms, it was first introduced as people were telling us what they were having for lunch. Now they're telling us what they think about, a conflict or an issue, and that has evolved at an incredibly fast pace. These guidelines, ours is JP&P, journalistic practices and principles. But it can't be seen in isolation of just a book. It's an evolving document. And there is social media policy from both Chorus Entertainment and from Global News. We've just been through an exercise looking at our editorial lens, looking at our JP&P, evolving it. It's been updated, ongoing. We've changed our media policy to actually provide our journalists an opportunity to step back from social media. There was an obligation in the hiring process that they would be active on social media, but we've seen the impacts that it's had on them, the personal hatred and attacks. So there's a lot of unwanted hate, and there's a lot of manipulation of what's going on. And frankly, our position is always that we should be populating our own platforms and ensuring that we meet the standards of journalism. So the idea of lived experience, I think that finding a way to express that and how you feel is different for everyone, and it's very subjective. And how far do you take it? And the backlash is what worries me when it happens, as Brody referenced, when it starts to impact your organization, when it's not reflective of the entire work or body of work that we're doing based on one individual's tweet. So it's very complex, and I don't think anybody that's either listening to this session or actively working in this business would say there's a simple single solution. But it is about the conversation, the interpretation, and the spirit of what we're trying to do.
Okay, I want to get to this next question. Dave, this one's for you. And Wendy, you talked about younger audiences. We heard that the median age in Canada is 41. 20% of people are here who live here are foreign born in the session that just passed. So, there are opportunities to get new audiences. So Dave, I'll start with this. In an increasingly digital world, and push toward web stories, is there enough revenue available on a news website to maintain the number of reporters, journalists currently employed if and when over-the-air broadcast news viewership declines? I'm going to merge it with another question about how to attract new audiences.
So the simple answer is purely on the website, not yet. But the work that we do and making the transition from traditional, everything aimed at the 6 o'clock broadcast to being more digital and being more 24/7, also allows us to focus more attention on other emerging platforms. And from YouTube, there's lots of revenue available. Not enough to fund a newsroom, but between YouTube, other social platforms, our website, and who knows what will come along next. I think that there will be a model that survives the eventual end of pure broadcast journalism.
I also think it's important for people who didn't see Daryl Bricker's presentation before. I know a lot of people only came on at 9:30. When big news happens like COVID, Canadians still turned to linear television and to the broadcasters. The ratings were huge. However, people don't realize that the ad revenue was not there. So we have these enormous ratings with not a lot of ad revenue coming in because of the pandemic. And that is very worrisome. But we are still at a point where linear TV is making lots of money. It's still like that, but at some point digital will overtake it. And that's why it's important that our news be on every platform, on every device, and anywhere at all times, because we need to reach everyone. As we know, young people, they're not watching linear TV. So we have to be where they are, and that's very important.
Brody, how are you trying to attract younger audiences to the CBC?
Yeah, I mean, similar in that we are paying a lot of attention on where audiences are and the age of our audience, which, it's pretty consistent for everyone. You have a average age of 60-ish, 55, 60 for linear traditional television and radio, and we're middle-aged in digital. And then social media platforms and YouTube, which is a big content provider in this country, our younger audiences. So it's paying attention to the entire landscape, watching what's happening in terms of smart and connected televisions, and it's the whole consumption patterns are shifting. I think they've shifted dramatically this COVID year, to be honest. I think if you were to talk to your friends about how have your own media consumption habits changed, things have changed in prime time. What do people do when they stay home or they turn off their work computer and they're still at home, and then what are they going to do with their time at night? It's different from a year ago. So it's trying to stay ahead of those trends and paying real close attention to them. And, fortunately, we're in many of these places, but it's quite a mix right now. And it's quite taxing on any news organization where, we're not 2 platforms or 3 platforms, which some people think TV, radio, and digital. No, we're probably 15 to 20 when you count up smart speakers and social channels and newsletters and your Snap offer and Instagram strategy, and it's a lot to serve, and it's demanding, but you kind of got to do it.
Especially in a time where the resources aren't what they used to be. Now, Ward and Dave, there's also a question here about, because we're talking about younger audiences, but there's also a real trend of news avoiders, people who are tired of COVID coverage, maybe trust has been eroded. Perhaps it's not just our fault, it's also the politicians and the communication gaps that we've seen over COVID. So how do we win back those news avoiders, people who say, I'm just done with the news?
Well, look, who knows? Maybe, but where are they getting their information would be my first question. But I think that it's related to the question that was just asked. Gathering and telling stories is what we do. People share information in a number of different ways. I think that the elements of gathering and telling stories is far beyond any one platform. What's interesting when you look at the metrics and you look at where the most investment that you put your attention to, it appears differently. There's different windows. There's a broadcast immediate window. Then there's a longer tail of viewing on YouTube, or we've created 14 virtual channels of streaming services, free. And so people like free. They don't always want to pay for the content. And I think that somehow for those news avoiders, as you say, we're seeing in our just our streaming service on apps, we're on Amazon, we're seeing like millions of hours of consumption a month. And these are people that typically wouldn't have cable, wouldn't pay for that kind of service. They don't want a subscription fee. So somewhere there is audience, and it's finding and positioning yourself to do it. So the news nevers, they'll eventually need to find out information about buying a house or buying a car or about their kids' education or who won the game. So these are the things that, they can find it on social media for sure. And maybe they do, but it's the discovery of that. And I think that the aggregator services that we've alluded to, that Bricker alluded to, Daryl Bricker alluded to, those are real threats to our business as much as they carry our business and our content. And so as we're investing, nobody has to pay global news directly to through taxes or otherwise to watch or consume our content. And that is a public service that we're very proud of. But if it isn't, and Bill C-10, which is out there, really is trying to address some of the incongruencies in how we survive as an organization and as an industry. And for me, it's always boils down to great content that's relevant and essential for our communities.
Dave?
I agree on the relevance part. I think for me, it's always been two things: be relevant and be distinct, right? If the audience thinks that your content is the same as everybody else's content and you're telling the same stories, and we've all been to markets where you can turn on the TV at 6 o'clock and watch newscast after newscast do the same stories in the same order and then get to the weather at the same time. And it's no wonder that audience reacts poorly to that. So figure out how you can create content that is actually relevant and impactful and meaningful to people, and do it in a way that doesn't feel like it's the same thing. Do it in a way that speaks to the audience that you're trying to get. We at City News in Toronto, we had, in the space of a year, I'm going back about 4 years, we had triple-digit audience growth on TV in the 18 to 34 demographic. But that was the year that we got away from the anchor-driven format, where it was nothing but reporters in the field, with an emphasis on live, but a special emphasis on breaking original stories that were sort of targeted towards younger urban viewers. So be important, right? Give them what they need. This just a week ago at 680 News in Toronto, Amber LeBlanc's idea, we started the Shot Spotter. So it's twice an hour. Where is the best place to go today to get your vaccination? The response from the public has been fantastic because people are looking for that information, and doing it in this format makes it easy for them to get that information. So I don't think it's I'm not fatalistic about people giving up on news. People, like Ward says, people are always going to recognize that they need or want some kinds of information. You just have to be anticipating that, make sure that you're giving it to them, and try to do so in a way that speaks to them.
Yeah, and maybe we have to do a better job explaining what is news, fact-based news, what's editorial, what's a news channel. The purpose to just educate, our viewers on news literacy almost, because all the lines have been blurred. So that also, I think, is on us in terms of the trust here. I have to wrap up. We couldn't get to all of our questions, questions from our viewers, but I thank you all for sending them in and being part of this very important discussion. And I thank you, our panelists, for being in the hot seat and taking all of our questions today. So thank you for being with us. Thank you also to CNN, a longtime supporter of RTDNA Canada. Thank you for your support. That's it for me. It's been such a pleasure being with you and being the moderator of that Bear Pit session, which is, of course, so important for us to all learn about the future of news and where our news leaders see things going in the next few years. I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions as well. We have a really good one up next, diversity and inclusion in journalism. What has really changed in newsrooms a year after the death of George Floyd? And it's moderated by my colleague Tracy Tong. This session has a critical connection to this year's conference theme as well, Reckoning and Recovery, and it is going to start in 5 minutes. So while we reset for our next panel, let's listen to the words of some of the journalists who were honored by the RTDNA Canada for their Lifetime Achievement Award, starting with this group from the RTDNA's East Region. Have a wonderful day, everyone.